The nutrient bars hit the deck with a soft thud, scattering like oversized pills across the metal grating. Marcus Chen cursed under his breath, dropping to one knee beside his overturned supply crate. 3 weeks hauling cargo between the outer rim stations, and this was how his day was going to start. Cleaning up spilled provisions while the morning shift change created chaos around him. Kepler 442b's mining station buzzed with its usual mechanical symphony. Ore processors rumbled in the distance, their vibrations traveling through the deck plates and into Marcus's bones. He'd been working these routes for 8 years, long enough to know every sound the station made, every rhythm of its artificial heartbeat. The place was a monument to human persistence, a steel and ceramic tumor growing on the surface of a planet that wanted nothing to do with organic life. "Damn magnetic locks," Marcus muttered, examining the crate's faulty seal. The bars were standard-issue protein supplements, nothing fancy, but losing even one shipment meant paperwork that would follow him to 3 different stations. He began gathering the scattered packages, their silver wrappers catching the harsh overhead lighting. That's when he saw it. A flash of movement in his peripheral vision, quick and low to the ground. Marcus turned his head just in time to see a small figure dart between 2 massive cargo containers, clutching something against its chest. The figure moved with an odd, flowing gait, not quite human. "Hey!" Marcus shouted, pushing himself to his feet. "Stop right there." The figure froze for a heartbeat, and Marcus got his first clear look. It was small, maybe 4 feet tall, with pale blue-gray skin that seemed to shimmer under the station's lights. Large, dark eyes dominated a face that was almost human but subtly wrong. The proportions just different enough to trigger that uncanny valley response that made Marcus's skin crawl. The creature wore tattered clothing that might have once been white, now stained with grease and grime. In its thin arms, it clutched 3 of Marcus's nutrient bars. "Put those down," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. He'd heard about the alien refugees that sometimes showed up on rim stations, displaced persons from conflicts in distant systems, usually harmless but desperate. The mining companies tolerated them as long as they stayed out of the way and didn't cause trouble. This was definitely causing trouble. The alien child, Marcus was almost certain it was young. Something about its proportions and the way it held itself screamed youth and vulnerability. Stared at him with those enormous dark eyes. There was intelligence there and something else. Fear, yes, but underneath that was a desperation so raw and primal that it hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Look, kid," Marcus said, taking a step forward. "I get it. You're hungry, but you can't just take things. This is corporate property, and if security catches you..." The child bolted. Marcus swore and gave chase, his heavy work boots clanging against the deck plates. The alien was fast, incredibly fast, moving with a fluid grace that made Marcus feel clumsy and earthbound by comparison. It darted between cargo containers, slipped through gaps that Marcus had to squeeze through, always staying just ahead of his reaching fingers. They ran deeper into the station's cargo section, past areas Marcus rarely visited. The lighting grew dimmer here, the sounds of the main operations fading to a distant hum. Warning signs in multiple languages decorated the bulkheads: authorized personnel only, radiation hazard, atmospheric processors. The child suddenly veered left, disappearing through what looked like a solid wall. Marcus skidded to a halt, breathing hard, and examined the area more closely. There, a maintenance hatch, barely visible in the dim lighting, its access panel hanging open on broken hinges. Marcus hesitated. Chasing a thief through public areas was one thing, but following it into the station's maintenance sections was something else entirely. Those areas were often poorly pressurized, sometimes contaminated with industrial chemicals or radiation from the mining operations. There were good reasons they were restricted, but those eyes, that desperate, hungry look. Marcus thought about his own childhood on Mars Colony 7, the lean years when his father's mining contract got canceled and the family had to stretch protein rations for weeks. He remembered the gnawing emptiness in his stomach, the way hunger became a constant companion that colored every thought and decision. He squeezed through the hatch. The maintenance tunnel was cramped and dark, lit only by emergency strips that cast everything in a sickly red glow. The air was stale and carried the metallic taste of recycled atmosphere pushed beyond its limits. Marcus had to crouch to move forward, his shoulders brushing against pipes and conduits that carried the station's lifeblood: power, water, air, data. Ahead, he could hear the soft pad of the alien child's feet against the tunnel floor. The sound was getting fainter, leading him deeper into the station's hidden arteries. Marcus followed, driven by a curiosity he couldn't quite explain. This wasn't about the stolen food anymore. Something about the child's desperation had hooked itself into his chest and wouldn't let go. The tunnel branched and branched again, creating a maze that Marcus tried to memorize but quickly lost track of. How did the child know these passages so well? How long had it been living in the station's forgotten spaces? Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the tunnel opened into a wider space. Marcus emerged into what looked like an abandoned storage chamber, probably unused since the station's early construction phases. The room was larger than his quarters, filled with discarded equipment and forgotten supplies. And there, in the far corner, huddled together like broken dolls, was a family. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. The alien child he'd been chasing stood protectively in front of two other figures. One clearly adult, the other smaller, possibly younger than the thief. All three shared the same pale blue-gray skin and large dark eyes, but where the child who'd stolen from him moved with desperate energy, these two were still as death. The adult figure was clearly female, though Marcus wasn't sure how he knew that. Something in her posture, the way she held herself despite obvious weakness, spoke of maternal protection. She was thin, not just slim, but gaunt in a way that spoke of prolonged starvation. Her skin had a translucent quality that made the dark veins beneath visible like a roadmap of suffering. When she lifted her head to look at Marcus, her eyes held the same intelligence as her child's, but dimmed by exhaustion and pain. The smaller figure, curled against the female's side, didn't move at all. For a terrifying moment, Marcus thought it might be dead. "Please," the mother said, and Marcus nearly jumped out of his skin. Her voice was soft, melodic, but the words were clear human standard. "Please don't hurt them." Marcus realized he was still standing in the tunnel opening, probably looking like some kind of threat. He slowly raised his hands, trying to appear non-threatening, and took a careful step into the chamber. "I'm not going to hurt anyone," he said quietly. Are you okay?" It was possibly the stupidest question he'd ever asked. None of them were okay. The mother looked like she hadn't eaten in weeks. The smallest child, Marcus could see now that it was breathing just barely, seemed to be unconscious from weakness. Even the thief, the one with enough energy to run through the station and steal food, was trembling with exhaustion. The mother's eyes tracked his movement as he stepped fully into the chamber. "Cree didn't mean harm," she said, indicating the child who'd stolen the nutrient bars. "So hungry. We are sorry." Marcus looked around the makeshift shelter. They'd arranged some old thermal blankets and foam padding to create a nest of sorts, but it was pitifully inadequate. A few empty water containers sat nearby, along with scraps of what might have once been food packaging. The air in the chamber was cold enough that Marcus could see his breath. "How long have you been here?" he asked. The mother seemed to consider this, her head tilting slightly. "Many sleeps. Lost count after." She trailed off, her eyes growing distant. Cree, the thief, had torn open one of the stolen nutrient bars and was trying to wake the smaller child. The little one stirred weakly, making soft sounds that didn't quite translate as words but clearly meant hunger, need, please. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He'd seen desperation before, worked with people pushed to their limits by the harsh realities of Rim Station life. But this was different. This was a family dying by degrees in the forgotten corners of human space, invisible to everyone who might help them. "What's your name?" he asked the mother. "Senna," she replied, then gestured to the smaller child. "This is Jorik, and Cree you have met." "I'm Marcus," he said, then immediately felt foolish. Introductions seemed absurd in this situation. "Senna, you need medical attention. Food, water." Why didn't you go to station services? They have refugee assistance programs. Senna's laugh was bitter and weak. No help for Zephyrians. Not here. Not anywhere now. Zephyrians. Marcus had heard the name in news reports, usually buried in the back sections where colonial conflicts were reduced to dry statistics. Their homeworld had been caught in the middle of some territorial dispute between two larger species. From what he remembered, it hadn't ended well for anyone involved. The war, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Senna nodded, her eyes closing briefly. Kethtar came first. Said they were protecting us from human expansion. Then humans came. Said they were protecting us from Kethtar. Both sides used our world as battlefield. Both sides called us allies when convenient, enemies when not. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. He'd heard variations of this story before. Small species caught between larger powers, their worlds turned into proxy battlefields. Their people scattered like debris when the fighting moved on. We had ship, Senna continued, her voice growing weaker. Escaped with others. But ship was old, breaking. Made it this far before. She gestured vaguely at the walls around them. Not citizens. Not refugees with papers. Just displaced. The word hung in the cold air like an accusation. Displaced. A clinical term for people whose entire existence had been torn apart by forces beyond their control. Kree had managed to get Jorik to eat a small piece of the nutrient bar, and some color was returning to the little one's pale features. But it was clear that one meal, even 3 meals, wouldn't be enough to undo the damage of prolonged starvation. Senna, Marcus said carefully, there are protocols. Even for undocumented refugees, there are supposed to be emergency medical services. Tried, Senna whispered. First station we reached. They said Zephyrians were security risk. War made U.S. untrustworthy. Some of our people, desperate, had done bad things on other stations. All Zephyrians now painted with same brush. Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd seen this before too, how quickly desperation could turn people against each other, how fear made it easy to deny help to those who needed it most. Security came, Senna continued, said they would process our request, find us proper placement. But we heard them talking about detention facility, about separating families during investigation. Kree and Jorik would go to youth facility, I would go to adult processing. Might not see each other for months, maybe years. She looked at her children with an expression that transcended species. Pure, fierce maternal love. So we ran. It'd been hiding ever since. Moving from station to station, ship to ship when we could. Always running, always hungry, always afraid. Marcus crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with the family. Up close, he could see details that made his heart ache. Jorik couldn't be more than 5 or 6 in human terms, still young enough to trust that adults would take care of everything. Kree was older, maybe 10, old enough to understand their situation but still too young to carry the weight that was clearly on those thin shoulders. How long since you've had a real meal? Marcus asked. Senna's eyes filled with something that might have been tears, though they didn't fall the same way human tears did. Real meal? Before the ship broke. Week ago? More. Marcus made a decision that surprised him with its simplicity. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his personal food rations, emergency supplies he always carried for long hauls. Nothing fancy, just protein bars and hydration tablets, but nutritionally complete. Here, he said, offering them to Senna. It's not much, but it's a start. Senna stared at the packages as if she couldn't quite believe they were real. You? Why would you help us? We stole from you. Marcus thought about that for a moment. Why was he helping them? Because they were hungry? Because they were desperate? Because seeing a mother trying to keep her children alive in a forgotten corner of a space station reminded him of every story his own parents had told about the early days of human expansion, when Earth's refugees scattered to the stars looking for homes that didn't want them. Because it's right, he said finally. Because you're people and people take care of each other. Senna's composure finally cracked. She reached out with trembling hands to accept the food, and tears did fall then. Strange, silvery droplets that caught the emergency lighting like liquid starlight. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." But even as Marcus watched the family divide the meager rations with careful precision, he knew this was just the beginning. Food would keep them alive for another day or two, but it wouldn't solve the larger problem. They needed medical care, proper shelter, some kind of legal status that would let them exist without hiding in maintenance tunnels. And time was running out. Marcus could see it in Senna's labored breathing, in the way she had to rest between small movements. Whatever was wrong with her, starvation, illness, exhaustion, or all three, she was failing fast. The sound of footsteps in the tunnel outside made everyone freeze. "Chan! Marcus Chen, you in there?" The voice echoed through the maintenance tunnels, distorted by the enclosed space but unmistakably human, and unmistakably angry. Marcus recognized the voice immediately. Security Chief Rodriguez, a man who'd never met a regulation he couldn't enforce with aggressive enthusiasm. The family huddled closer together, Senna instinctively pulling both children behind her despite her obvious weakness. "Stay quiet," Marcus whispered, his mind racing. How had Rodriguez tracked him here? The maintenance tunnels weren't monitored by standard security systems, but Marcus's crew badge would have left a digital trail at every access hatch. "Chen, I know you're in the restricted areas. Your badge logged you through hatch 7 Alpha 20 minutes ago, and you haven't logged back out. You've got 60 seconds to respond before I call this in as a potential security breach." The threat hung in the recycled air like a toxic cloud. Security breaches on RIM stations weren't taken lightly. Too many ways for things to go catastrophically wrong when you were suspended in the void between stars. If Rodriguez escalated this, it would mean emergency response teams, full tunnel sweeps, and absolutely no way to keep Senna and her children hidden. Marcus caught Senna's eye and saw his own desperation reflected there. She understood the danger as clearly as he did. Her thin hands moved protectively over her children's heads, and Marcus could see her making the same calculation he was. How to protect the people who mattered most when the universe seemed determined to crush them. "I'm here, Rodriguez," Marcus called out, moving toward the tunnel entrance. "Just checking some loose cargo tie-downs. Had a container come open during transport." He squeezed back through the hatch, hoping his body would block any view of the chamber beyond. Rodriguez was waiting in the main tunnel, his security uniform crisp despite the cramped conditions. The man was built like a cargo loader, thick neck, broad shoulders, hands that looked comfortable wrapped around a stun baton. "Loose cargo?" Rodriguez repeated, his tone suggesting he'd heard more convincing lies from maintenance droids. "In a decommissioned storage area that's been sealed for 3 years. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "The container was damaged near the access point. I thought I heard something rattling in the walls. Wanted to make sure nothing had fallen into the maintenance space." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. He was a man who'd built his career on suspicion, and right now every instinct was telling him that Marcus Chun was lying through his teeth. "Show me." "Show you what?" "The damaged container. The loose cargo. Show me what brought a veteran hauler into restricted areas without proper authorization." Marcus's mouth went dry. He could hear the trap closing around him, could feel the weight of the choice he was about to make. Behind him, through the hatch he desperately hoped Rodriguez couldn't see, 3 refugees waited in the dark. A dying mother and her starving children, trusting him to keep them safe. "Look, Rodriguez, it was nothing major. Just wanted to be thorough. Cut the crap, Chin." Rodriguez stepped closer, and Marcus could smell the recycled coffee on his breath. "I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know when someone's hiding something. What's really going on here?" For a moment, Marcus considered telling the truth. Rodriguez was human, had to have some capacity for compassion buried under all that regulation enforcement. Maybe if he explained the situation, if he helped Rodriguez see that this was about saving lives rather than breaking rules, but the moment passed as quickly as it came. Marcus had seen too many security chiefs on too many stations, watched them choose procedure over people every single time. Rodriguez wouldn't see 3 refugees in need of help. He'd see 3 undocumented aliens, potential security risks, problems to be processed through proper channels regardless of the human cost. "There's nothing going on," Marcus said firmly. "I did my job, checked what needed checking. Now I'm going back to work." He started to push past Rodriguez, hoping to end the confrontation before it could escalate further. But the security chief's hand shot out, gripping Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "I don't think so. We're going to take a look in that storage area together. Right now." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Rodriguez saw the family, it was over. Best case scenario, they'd be processed into the system that had already failed them once. Worst case, they'd be classified as stowaways or infiltrators, separated and shipped to detention facilities where Senna would die alone while her children grew up as wards of whatever authority claimed jurisdiction. "There's nothing to see," Marcus said, but he could hear the desperation creeping into his own voice. "Then you won't mind me taking a look." Rodriguez released Marcus's arm and moved toward the hatch. Marcus watched in slow-motion horror as the security chief's hand reached for the opening, knowing that in seconds the hiding place would be exposed and 3 lives would be destroyed by bureaucratic indifference. That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the tunnel in the same red glow Marcus had followed earlier, but the momentary darkness was enough. In that instant of confusion, Marcus made a choice that would define everything that came after. He hit Rodriguez hard, a solid punch to the solar plexus that doubled the security chief over and sent him crashing into the tunnel wall. The man's head connected with a pipe junction with a sound like a melon dropped on concrete, and he slumped to the tunnel floor, unconscious. Marcus stared at Rodriguez's still form, his knuckles throbbing, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd just assaulted a station security officer. Even if Rodriguez couldn't prove what Marcus had been hiding, the assault charge alone would mean prison time, loss of his hauler license, the end of everything he'd worked to build. But behind him, through the hatch, 3 people were still alive who might not be tomorrow. "Marcus!" Senna's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried clearly in the enclosed space. "It's okay," he called back, though nothing about this situation was remotely okay. "Stay where you are." He knelt beside Rodriguez, checking for a pulse and finding one. Strong and steady. Good. The last thing he needed was a murder charge on top of everything else. The security chief would wake up with a spectacular headache and probably no clear memory of the few seconds before the lights went out. With luck, he'd assume he'd hit his head during the power fluctuation. Marcus dragged Rodriguez's unconscious form back toward the main maintenance area, away from the hidden chamber. It was awkward work in the cramped tunnel, but eventually he managed to position the man near a junction box that showed signs of recent electrical work. If Rodriguez remembered anything when he woke up, hopefully he'd assume he'd been investigating a power fault when something went wrong. The deception bought them time, but not much. Rodriguez would be missed eventually, and when he was found, there would be questions. The security chief might not remember exactly what he'd been investigating, but he'd remember that it had something to do with Marcus Chen and restricted areas. Marcus made his way back to the hidden chamber, his mind racing through possibilities and finding no good options. The family couldn't stay here. It was only a matter of time before the hiding place was discovered. But they couldn't exactly walk out through the main station corridors either, not with security already suspicious. "We have to move," he told Senna as he squeezed back through the hatch. "It's not safe here anymore." Senna had managed to get both children to eat while he was gone, and there was slightly more color in their faces. But she looked worse, if anything. The brief burst of hope from receiving food had faded, leaving only exhaustion and the growing certainty that their situation was impossible. "Move where?" she asked quietly. "There is nowhere left to run." Marcus looked at the 3 of them, a dying mother and her starving children, refugees from a war that had made them unwelcome everywhere they went. The rational part of his mind was screaming that he'd already done more than enough, that he'd risked everything to help strangers who weren't his responsibility. But looking at Jorik, barely old enough to understand why he was always hungry, and at Kree, old enough to know that adults were supposed to protect children but young enough to still believe it might happen, Marcus realized that rationality had never been the point. "I have a ship," he said. The words surprised him as much as they surprised Senna. He hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even consciously decided to offer. But once the words were out, he knew they were true. He had the Wanderer's Rest, a modified cargo hauler with enough space for passengers if they didn't mind traveling in conditions that barely met safety minimums. You would take us away from here? Senna's voice carried a fragile hope that made Marcus's chest tight. Yeah, he said, the decision crystallizing as he spoke. Yeah, I would. But we have to move now, before security starts asking questions I can't answer. He helped Senna to her feet, shocked by how light she felt, how fragile. She could barely support her own weight, and the idea of her making it through the maze of maintenance tunnels seemed impossible. But when Kree moved to her other side, supporting his mother with a strength that seemed impossible in someone so young, Marcus realized that impossible was just another word for necessary. Where will we go? Senna asked as they prepared to leave their hiding place. Marcus thought about the question, about the dozens of stations and colonies scattered across the sector of space. Most would be no more welcoming than this one. Most would see 3 Zephyrian refugees as problems to be processed rather than people to be helped. But there had to be somewhere, someone, some place in the vast cosmos where 3 people could find a home. I don't know yet, Marcus admitted, but we'll figure it out together. The journey through the maintenance tunnels felt like crawling through the intestines of some vast mechanical beast. Marcus led the way, his emergency light cutting through the darkness ahead, while Kree supported his mother and carried little Jorik when the youngest could no longer walk. Every sound made them freeze, the distant hum of ventilation systems, the creak of settling metal, the occasional voice echoing through the main corridors beyond the walls. Senna's breathing grew more labored with each step. Twice she had to stop completely, leaning against the tunnel walls while waves of weakness washed over her. During the second stop, she began coughing deep, wet sounds that echoed ominously in the enclosed space. How much further? Kree whispered, his young voice tight with worry for his mother. Marcus checked his mental map of the station's layout. Not far. My ship's docked at Bay 12. We just need to reach the outer ring maintenance access. But even as he said it, Marcus knew they were pushing against time and Senna's failing strength. The woman was dying. He could see it in the way she moved, the gray pallor of her skin, the increasing frequency of those terrible coughing fits. Whatever combination of starvation, exhaustion, and illness was consuming her, it was winning. They reached the final access hatch just as Senna collapsed. She went down without warning, her legs simply giving out as if someone had cut her strings. Kree cried out, trying to catch her, but he was too small and she was falling too fast. Marcus spun around and managed to cushion her fall, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw something that made his blood freeze. Senna? Stay with me. Her eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated. Her skin felt fever-hot to the touch, but she was shivering as if caught in a blizzard. The coughing fit that followed brought up blood, dark droplets that looked almost black in the emergency lighting. Mama! Jorik's voice was high and scared, the universal sound of a child who knows something is terribly wrong but doesn't understand what. Marcus felt panic rise in his throat. He was a cargo hauler, not a medic. He knew basic first aid, could treat cuts and bruises and the minor injuries that came with moving freight in dangerous places. But this was beyond anything in his experience. We need to get her to medical, he said, more to himself than to the children. No. Senna's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried absolute certainty. No doctors. They will separate us. Send children away. Senna, you're dying. Without proper medical care, we'll die anyway. She gripped his arm with surprising strength, her fever-bright eyes locking onto his. Promise me. Keep children together. Don't let them take my babies. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. She wasn't just asking him to help them escape the station. She was asking him to become responsible for 2 orphaned alien children in a universe that had already demonstrated its hostility toward their kind. You're not going to die, he said, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Senna's grip tightened. Promise. Marcus looked at Kree and Jorik, saw the terror in their large dark eyes as they watched their mother fade before them. These children had already lost their world, their people, everything that had given their lives meaning. Now they were about to lose the one person who had kept them alive through months of running and hiding. "I promise," he said quietly. Senna's grip relaxed slightly, and something that might have been relief flickered across her features. "Good. You are good person, Marcus Chin. Children will remember." She closed her eyes then, her breathing becoming shallow and irregular. Marcus felt helplessness wash over him in waves. Even if he could get her to the station's medical bay, the questions would be immediate and damning. An undocumented alien refugee in critical condition would trigger every security protocol the station had. But maybe there was another option. "Can you carry Jorik?" he asked Cree. The older child nodded, though Marcus could see the exhaustion in every line of his small body. "Where are we going?" "My ship. I've got a basic medical kit there, and we'll have privacy to figure out what to do next." It was a thin hope, but it was the only one they had. Marcus lifted Senna as gently as he could, shocked again by how little she weighed. She felt like a bundle of sticks wrapped in skin, and her fever was getting worse by the minute. The access hatch opened onto a service corridor that ran along the station's outer ring. The artificial gravity was lighter here, closer to the hull, making it easier to carry Senna but adding an unsettling sense of floating to every step. Docking Bay 12 was only a few hundred meters away, but the corridor felt exposed after the cramped security of the maintenance tunnels. They made it halfway before they heard the voices. "Complete sweep of all maintenance areas. I want every tunnel, every access hatch, every forgotten corner of this station checked twice." "Rodriguez," the security chief's voice carried clearly down the corridor, coming from somewhere near the main elevator bank. He was awake, alert, and very angry. "Sir, that's going to take hours. We don't even have current schematics for some of the older sections." "Then get the schematics. Chun was hiding something in those tunnels, and I'm going to find out what." Marcus pressed himself against the corridor wall, motioning for Cree to do the same. The children complied immediately, their experience as refugees having taught them the vital skill of becoming invisible when authority figures were nearby. "What about Chun himself?" another voice asked. "Bring him in for questioning. And I want his ship searched too. Something's not right about this whole situation." Marcus felt the trap closing around them. Rodriguez might not remember exactly what he'd been investigating, but his suspicions were clearly intact. It was only a matter of time before the security teams reached the hidden chamber, found evidence of the family's presence, and started connecting dots. They had minutes, maybe less, before the station locked down completely. Marcus made a decision born of desperation and the promise he'd made to a dying mother. He lifted Senna more securely in his arms and started moving toward the docking bay at a pace that was just short of running. "Stay close," he whispered to Cree. "We're almost there." Bay 12 came into view, and Marcus felt a surge of relief at the sight of the Wanderer's Rest. The ship wasn't much to look at, a century-old cargo hauler with more patches than original hull plating, but she was his, and more importantly, she was ready to fly. The docking bay was empty except for his ship and a maintenance bot that was slowly polishing the deck plates with mechanical precision. Marcus fumbled for his access card, his hands shaking with adrenaline and the strain of carrying Senna. The airlock cycled open with a soft hiss, revealing the Wanderer's familiar cramped interior. Home had never looked so good. "Welcome aboard," Marcus said to the children as they stepped across the threshold. "You're safe now." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. They weren't safe, they were fugitives now, all of them. The moment Marcus lifted off without proper clearance, he'd be a criminal in the eyes of station security. There would be no going back to his old life, no return to the simple existence of hauling cargo between the rim stations. He carried Senna to his own quarters, the only space on the ship with a proper bed, and laid her down as gently as he could. Her breathing was becoming more labored, and the fever was making her delirious. She mumbled words in what Marcus assumed was her native language, soft syllables that sounded like wind through alien trees. The children clustered around the bed, Cree holding Jorik's hand while both of them stared at their mother with the helpless intensity of the very young confronted with mortality. "Is she going to be okay?" Jorik asked in a small voice. Marcus opened his mouth to offer comfort, some reassuring lie about everything being fine, but the words died in his throat. These children had been through too much, seen too much, to be fooled by empty promises. They deserved honesty, even if the truth was hard. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but we're going to do everything we can for her." Alarms began sounding throughout the station, the harsh, insistent wail of emergency alert status. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Rodriguez had escalated the situation faster than expected. "Attention all personnel." The station's public address system crackled to life. "This is a security alert. All movement within the station is restricted pending completion of security sweep. Any unauthorized personnel found in restricted areas will be detained for questioning." Marcus moved to the ship's communication panel and activated the docking control frequency. "Control. This is Wanderer's Rest requesting immediate departure clearance." The response was immediate and predictable. "Negative, Wanderer's Rest. All departures are suspended pending security alert resolution. Return to standby status. Control, I have a medical emergency aboard. Request priority clearance for immediate dust-off to nearest medical facility." A longer pause this time. "Wanderer's Rest, stand by for security verification. Transmit your passenger manifest and medical emergency details." Marcus closed the channel without responding. They both knew there was no passenger manifest, no documented medical emergency. Just a cargo hauler trying to escape with 3 refugees who officially didn't exist. He turned to find Cree watching him with those large, dark eyes that seemed to hold far too much understanding for someone so young. "They won't let us leave," the child said. It wasn't a question. "No," Marcus admitted. "They won't." He moved to the pilot's seat and began the ship's startup sequence without authorization. Warning lights flashed across the control panel as systems that should have required docking control approval activated anyway. The Wanderer's Rest had been modified over the years, some of those modifications existing in legal gray areas that Marcus had never worried about before. Today, those gray areas might save their lives. "What are you doing?" Cree asked. Marcus's hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, preparing for the kind of departure that would permanently burn his bridges with station authority. "Something I should have done a long time ago," he said. "I'm choosing people over procedures." The ship's engines began their startup cycle, a deep thrumming that resonated through the hull. In his quarters, Senna stirred restlessly, and Marcus wondered if she could feel the ship preparing to carry her children toward whatever hope remained in the galaxy. On the docking bay's communication panel, urgent messages began flashing. Demands for immediate shutdown, threats of criminal prosecution, orders to return to compliance. Marcus ignored them all and engaged the departure sequence. The Wanderer's Rest tore away from Kepler 442b with the violence of extraction under fire, her engines screaming at emergency power as Marcus pushed every system beyond safe limits. Behind them, the mining station's defense grid came online, targeting scanners painting the fleeing ship with acquisition beams that made the hull ring like a struck bell. "Warning shots," Marcus muttered, his hands dancing across the control panel as he threw the ship into a spiral that would make navigation computers weep. "They're still hoping to force us back." The first plasma bolt streaked past the viewports, close enough to ionize the outer hull and send electrical discharges crackling across the ship's systems. Marcus felt the Wanderer shudder as secondary systems overloaded and automatically shut down to prevent cascade failures. In the quarters behind him, Senna was dying. Marcus could hear the children talking to their mother in their soft, musical language, could hear the increasingly desperate edge in their voices as she failed to respond. Between the plasma bolts and the critical navigation decisions, he caught fragments of their conversation. Pleas for her to stay awake, promises to be good if she would just keep breathing. "Cree," Marcus called out. "I need you up here." The older child appeared in the cockpit doorway, his face streaked with tears that caught the light from the control panel displays. "She's not waking up," he said in a small voice. "I know." Marcus yanked the ship hard to starboard as another plasma bolt seared through the space they'd just occupied. "But right now I need your help to keep us alive. Can you do that?" Cree nodded. wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Despite everything he'd been through, despite the terror and loss and hunger, he was still just a child trying to be brave when the adults around him were falling apart. "Sit there," Marcus pointed to the co-pilot's seat. "See that panel with the red lights? When I tell you, push every button that's flashing." It was busy work, mostly. The emergency power redistribution could be handled automatically. But Kree needed something to focus on besides his mother's labored breathing, and Marcus needed to concentrate on keeping them alive long enough to reach whatever sanctuary they could find. The station's patrol ships launched as the Wanderer cleared the gravity well, sleek security cutters designed for exactly this kind of pursuit. They were faster than Marcus's cargo hauler, better armed, and crewed by people who had never questioned an order in their lives. But Marcus had spent 8 years hauling freight through the most dangerous regions of human space. He knew tricks that didn't appear in any manual, had survived encounters that should have killed him through a combination of skill, luck, and absolute refusal to give up when everything seemed hopeless. Today, he would need all of that and more. "Jump coordinates locked in," Marcus announced, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to Kree or to himself. "We're going to make a run for the Meridian system. There's a colony there that doesn't ask too many questions about documentation." The first patrol ship opened fire, its pulse cannons stitching a line of destruction across the space where the Wanderer would have been if Marcus hadn't anticipated the attack. The ship's defensive systems screamed warnings as energy discharges overloaded sensors and temporarily blinded their navigation systems. "Push the buttons, Kree. Now!" Small hands slapped across the emergency panel, and the Wanderer's power grid shifted into crisis mode. Non-essential systems shut down, life support dropped to minimum levels, and every available erg of energy fed into the engines and jump drive. "Good job," Marcus said, and meant it. "You're a natural pilot." Kree managed a wan smile, the first Marcus had seen from him. "Mama always said I was good with machines." The words hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. Past tense. The child was already beginning to accept that his mother wouldn't be there to say such things anymore. A proximity alarm shrieked as the second patrol ship tried to bracket them, coming in from above while its partner attacked from the rear. Marcus rolled the ship inverted and dove toward the system's asteroid belt, where the rocks would interfere with targeting systems and give a smaller ship advantages over larger pursuers. "How much longer?" Kree asked, his young voice steady despite the chaos around them. Marcus checked the jump drive status. 2 minutes to full charge. "Can you go check on your mother and Jorik? Tell them we're almost away." Kree unbuckled and headed aft, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the increasingly desperate situation outside. The patrol ships were herding him away from the clear space needed for a clean jump, forcing him deeper into the asteroid field where a single navigation error would turn the Wanderer into expanding plasma. But maybe that was exactly where he needed to be. Marcus cut the engines and let the ship drift behind a massive iron-nickel asteroid, using its bulk to mask their heat signature. The patrol ships shot past, their sensors momentarily confused by the interference. In the sudden quiet, Marcus could hear Senna's breathing, rapid, shallow, with long pauses that made his heart skip beats. He could hear Jorik crying softly, and Kree trying to comfort his little brother with the kind of false confidence that children learned when the adults in their lives could no longer be strong. The jump drive reached full charge with a harmonic whine that resonated through the ship's frame. Marcus felt the familiar tingle in his bones that meant the space around them was beginning to fold, reality preparing to compress the impossible distances between stars into a single step. "Kree!" he called. "Hold on to something." The patrol ships had found them again, emerging from behind neighboring asteroids with weapons already charging. Marcus could see the bright buildup of energy in their pulse cannons, could calculate exactly how long he had before they opened fire. Not long enough for a safe jump, but maybe long enough for a desperate one. Marcus engaged the jump drive while the ship was still drifting, still partially hidden behind the asteroid's bulk. Space twisted around them, stars stretching into lines of light as the Wanderer's rest tore a hole in the fabric of reality and dove through it. The last thing Marcus saw before the jump took them was the brilliant flash of pulse cannon fire lighting up the asteroid field behind them. Then they were elsewhere. The meridian system materialized around them in a cascade of returning starlight, 8 planets and 2 asteroid belts arranged around a stable yellow star. It was unremarkable in every way except one. It was 300 light-years from Kepler 442b, far enough that no patrol ship could follow them. They were safe. Marcus slumped in his pilot's seat, adrenaline and exhaustion warring in his bloodstream. The ship systems were running diagnostics, reporting minor damage from the pursuit, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. They'd made it. Against all odds, despite everything that had gone wrong, they'd actually made it. Marcus. Kree's voice was small and frightened. Something's wrong with Mama. The words cut through Marcus's relief like a plasma torch through hull plating. He unbuckled and rushed to his quarters, already knowing what he would find but hoping desperately that he was wrong. Senna lay still on the narrow bed, her breathing so shallow it was barely visible. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality that made her seem like she was already fading from the world. Jorek sat beside her, holding her hand and speaking to her in their native language, his young voice carrying a grief too large for someone so small. She stopped talking, Kree explained, tears streaming down his face. Right after the jump. She just stopped. Marcus knelt beside the bed and took Senna's other hand. Her skin was burning hot, but there was no strength left in her grip. Her eyes were closed, but behind the lids he could see rapid movement. Dreams or fever visions, impossible to tell which. Senna, he said quietly, we made it. We're safe now. Your children are safe. For a moment he thought she might not have heard him. Then her eyes opened, just slightly, and focused on his face with tremendous effort. Thank you, she whispered, the words barely audible. Take care of my stars. Her eyes closed again, and Marcus felt her hand grow still in his. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the ship's life support systems, and the quiet sound of 2 children beginning to understand that they were truly alone in the universe.